Hello and welcome back to Inside EMS. I'm your stand-in host, Rob Lawrence. I came over from the EMS One Stop, but there's always one constant here when Chris Cebollero is away, and that, of course, is Kelly Grayson. Hello, sir. How was your week?
It's been good, man. It's nice to have you here. Not only are you better looking, you're more articulate than Chris. It's nice to see.
Once again, I hope you cashed the check and the note that I wrote for you to say that.
That's
So
right. I've
thank you.
I've upgraded. I've upgraded. How you been?
Oh, I've been traveling, as you know. It's been a very important week for me politically last week, and maybe we can come on to that. But
Yeah.
no, so I'm actually home and home for a little while now. So I'm excited about that too.
Yeah, you've been at EMS on the Hill, as I take it?
I have been at EMS on the Hill, and before that, I was over in Chicago doing some American Ambulance Association stuff.
Nice.
And of course, my children all live in DC, so I've been fathering and grandparing as well. So it's been the
Well,
perfect road trip.
the grandpaing is the fun part. I think you raise kids to have grandkids one day, so you can do
Yes, indeed, and of course, with my children, the Associated Bank of Dad was open.
it. I can imagine. Well, man, I've been curious about EMS on the Hill and paint me as somewhat of a cynic about it as well. But it's nice to know that you've just been and you can fill our readers in on it. First, let's start. What is EMS on the Hill? Explain it to our readers, our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, so it's essentially a legislative day, and this EMS on the Hill is actually run and sponsored by NAEMT, National Association of EMTs. It's an annual event, and it is an event where all all are invited, first of all, and that's always like, well, how do you become qualified or how do you become selected? Well, all can go as far as NAMT members go. You arrive in DC and then you are grouped into states. And so I went over ostensibly to lead the California delegation. And then they will make appointments for you to see your elected officials. So, for example, we sat down with the in the offices of both California senators and a number of assembly members, representatives, and so that's how it all works in terms of that they will make appointments for the state reps to see the state people. So you are connecting with the people that you essentially put into office,
I
and of
see.
course can essentially relate to EMS in your area and can relate to the stories you tell, and then hopefully will be sympathetic to the bills that you are proposing. So that's kind of how it works. And then we have the various pieces of legislation that are being proposed this year. And the good news is, and I think I've said it certainly on my podcast, and I'm sure I've said it with you and Chris, is that our national associations are now hunting as a pack, which is a good thing. Checkbox
Yeah.
there. And so a lot of the bills, or majority of the bills, if not all the bills, are all supported by colleagues at American Ambulance Association, NEMT, International Association of Fire Chiefs, International Association of Firefighters. And I say those four because, of course, they not only are the largest national associations, they also have probably the biggest lobbying budgets as well. They have
Yeah.
people professionally paid
Yeah.
on Capitol Hill to look after our interests. And so that's how it works. And also the bills that we are going to talk about probably later are also bipartisan. In other words, we wouldn't walk something particularly under this administration, particularly this week. Bearing in mind, we were on the Hill the day after Tariff Gate started. I think we're now in a sort of stay of execution, but that's a discussion for another day. And so you walk in there with a bill that's already got a sponsor that is a Democrat and also a Republican. And so the way to get things done, of course, is, and interestingly, despite what you've been seeing and hearing on the national news, as a lot of them said to us, there's still a degree of bipartisan work going on there. There are things, it's a bit like, dealing with your household, Kelly. There are things that you all agree on, and there are some things
Mhm.
that you disagree on. Well, let's actually take those things that we agree on and get them done. And that's very much what's going on. And so we kind of walk in with that sort of not
Good.
position of strength, but actually the advantage of saying, yes, we actually have a sponsor from the Dems, we have a sponsor from the Republicans, and therefore people are going to sit down and listen to what you have to say. So, in
Good.
simple terms, that's NEMT's lobbying day.
Uh-huh.
Other national organizations, so there is a NEMSP, National Association of EMS Physicians, Hill Day. I know that colleagues on the fire side as well also have their Hill days as well. So no, people will go, well, hang on a second, you can't coordinate yourselves. But actually, my response to that is instead of getting it once a year, you're getting it 3 or 4, 5 times a year.
Yeah.
My friends at the American Ambulance Association are there as we speak, as we're recording. Kelly, they're on the Hill And so we have a lot of people going back in, reinforcing the messages, the points, the asks, etc. I've probably spoken too long, but hopefully that was a long-winded answer to your question.
I got you. Rob, how much face time do you get with the legislators in these meetings? I mean, is it just rushed, a handshake and yeah, we'll look into it, or do you actually get to talk with them for?
We have to acknowledge they're very busy people, first of all, and the appointment time is usually limited to 30 minutes. If you are lucky, and I'll explain why in a second, you get to sit down with the person, the elected official themselves. And the way that it normally goes is, and I sort of rehearse this with my folk when we get into the, get there on the day, is a round of introductions, give the context of who you are and where you're from, then, explain what you're doing there. So we're here in this case with the National Association of EMTs, EMS on the Hill Day. We have a number of bills, but actually we want to just pass over to the people that you have in the room. And so, for example, in my California delegation, we had a couple of very young but very enthusiastic EMTs from San Diego. They weren't from Chile.
Rob, your mic cut out.
There we go. I looked at my mic. Where did I leave you, Kelly? There.
The young folks from San Diego.
So we had some young folk from San Diego who were exceptionally polished, who were exceptionally keen and enthusiastic. And I have to tell you, they did us all proud, Kelly, the way that they presented themselves.
Nice.
We also had, obviously ambulance leaders, people like, I look after a state association. And so therefore I could be, Mr. California, as it were. And we also had colleagues from the union. We had the president of the Alameda local chapter of the NAGE, National Association of Government Employees, along as well. So we had a cross section. And of course, what does that mean? It means that I can tell the state association political story. We have operators that can talk about the issues of running a service. We have the EMTs who are on the ground. We have the union colleagues who can actually talk about some of the unique challenges. And so now, of course, it almost took me as long to tell you that as you have in front of these people. But of course, you get a bit of a flow, a bit of a cadence going.
Yeah.
And then, of course, afterwards, you then start to talk to the bills that you're proposing. Now, not everybody gets to see their elected official on the day, and there's a lot of discussion about, you're going to see the staffer, you're going to see the legislative assistant, etc. And I've got to be honest with you, some people, and I've been the master of quashing and quelling this. Oh, I'm only going to see the aide, or I'm going to see the assistant. Of course, in legislative terms, who writes the briefings, who does the research, who does the legwork? I can tell you it's not the senator or the representative.
It's just like in the military. The NCOs run the military, and it's the senior staffers that make government work.
I was an army officer, I probably want to disagree with you, but I think you're absolutely right. The sergeants mess rule the world, right? So that's the way forward. So you get to see, a combination of both, and certainly on our Hill Day last week, we got to meet folk.
Yeah.
I got a shout out to Eric Swalwell, who's the Democratic representative for one of the Bay Area constituencies. Not only did we get in there, we spent FaceTime, we sat on his couches. And then he actually had his own challenge coins. And so he then presented everybody in the delegation with a challenge coin. So a great exchange and, time well spent. And of course, I always conclude by saying, by the way, if you're back in the district, please come along and see us, come and do a ride along, send your staff, because of course, a lot of the staff, some of them are actually DC based and probably never get back to the district. But if you ever come across to, San Diego, or you're into the Bay, or wherever you come from, we would love to have you over and to show you exactly what it is that we do.
Yeah. Rob, with Chris on this podcast numerous times, I have somewhat been a skeptic of EMS Week, and particularly EMS on the Hill. I've always been of the opinion that EMS Week is that 1 week in the year where our employers assuage our anxiety with a pizza party and nothing else substantive. And for our legislators, EMS Week is that one time where they can get a photo op with us and pretend to care, and then the other 51 weeks of the year, they can ignore us. How do you respond to a skeptic like myself who says, really, does it do any good?
Well, you know what, Kelly, I'm delighted to be on this ride along on your truck with you today, because you can't get rid of me in a hurry until the shift's over, first of all. But let me address that let's not shy away from the fact is that there is a photo opportunity, but that works both ways. It gives us the opportunity for them to get a photograph with their constituents, and it gives us the opportunity to show people that we're up there and we're doing stuff, first of all. Secondly, I respectfully disagree with you about that it's a once and one and done, because there are the national associations. I'm involved, as you know, with the state association, and I live and breathe this stuff on a daily basis. Politics is a constant thing. Certainly in California, certainly in the federal hill, we have legislators that are there 365 days a year. Their job is to govern and to administrate and to legislate. My job is to make sure that we get the best deal for the organizations that we represent. Now, of course, there's that great saying, we move at the speed of government, we move at the speed of federal government. These things don't happen overnight, and it's a constant reinforcement of the ask. Whether you are in DC or whether you're in Sacramento, getting to know your locally elected officials, getting to know, what they need your help with. And that may well be, supporting a bill that's allied to us.
Yeah.
For example, in California, we're looking at things like supporting some vehicle changes for telecommunication trucks. What's that got to do with EMS? Well, actually, we all know that when there's a wildland fire, the next thing you want back in there are those, public utility vehicles to help reinstall the infrastructure. So it's within our interests to help those things. So that's one example of how we can actually provide support to each other. And so whilst it may appear, and actually shame on me for not letting people know, shame on me and people like me for not letting people know that we are on this all the time, dealing with politics, bills, elected officials. And so I take that note, actually, Kelly, as must do better. But we are on the case. Please, let me reassure you of that.
Yeah, well, I'm playing devil's advocate to a certain extent here. I am a cynic about much of these things. I try to put myself in the view of someone who is, you can't pay attention to advocacy because you're too busy running your next call and worried about your next paycheck. But for the people who do have the time and the energy to engage in that, politics, policy is made by the people who show up. And you hear it all over EMS is they want us to do this or this is what's changing, and it's always some amorphous day. And the people that actually show up are those people. You have two choices when it comes to politics. You can be at the mercy of EMS politics, or you can learn to play EMS politics and affect the outcome. So we appreciate you people who are not running the next dialysis transfer or worrying about where their next paycheck is, doing the heavy lifting of the advocacy there. So what issues are you guys talking about this year? What are you bringing to the
as a classic politician, let me give you a political answer by not answering your question first, but coming back.
No problem. You muted again somehow.
Very sensitive.
Very sensitive.
One of the things that I lecture about on the circuit, Kelly, obviously you've got your own set of, subjects. As you know, I'm more the operations and the sort of political and the legislation type stuff, right? One of the things I talk about is who is a politician. And my answer to you all is you all are. You talked about someone doing the interfacility transfer. Well, guess what? You're driving not only an ambulance, operating an ambulance, you're driving a billboard. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so you are visible, you are being seen, your locally elected official, the politician may see that. Of course, it helps me when I go in before whomever to say, when was the last time you saw an ambulance drive by? Well, actually, only this morning. Exactly. They're out there doing the job for you, elected official. And therefore, whether you know it or not, you are actually part of that political process because it's our PR almost that we're doing that. Yeah. Everybody exercises the right to vote in this country. That's a given right. Well, of course, then that gets you involved in the local politics. And of course, we're not only talking about, Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C. We're talking about your local state house. We're talking about whether you're in Albany or whether you're in Sacramento. We're talking about your local board of supervisors in the town, village, hamlet, parish that you used to live in, right? So everybody's got an opportunity to be involved because at every level, there's always an ask from us. If you live in a rural area right now, your local board of supervisors are probably totally surprised that, what do you mean we have to pay for some of our volunteer, and this is your Nancy's, pet subject,
Yep.
right? What do you mean we
Yep.
have to start paying for this when we've always just put a dollar in the boot outside the food line?
Do you
And that,
realize how many millions of dollars those people save you, you know, and
oh, no,
for
here's a
that?
hack actually.
Yeah.
So we had a pre-con day where we were talking about how to get involved in politics. And the question went out, how do you demonstrate to your locally elected officials just the value and the worth of what it is you're doing? And one of the answers came back was absolutely brilliant, right? So they play a game of sort of the price is right, where they'll put a monitor and a stretcher and other things there with a sort of piece of card turned round. And okay, Kelly, guess how
Yeah.
much this monitor cost me? And of course, the number is
Yeah.
usually far, far too low. Guess how much
Yeah.
this automatic stretcher self-loading device cost me?
Yeah.
And then you flip the card over, and then, as the person said, there is normally the look of shock at just the cost of the equipment that we have to maintain on the vehicle, and actually
Yeah.
stolen, or as I would say, are indeed ripped off and duplicated. Next time somebody comes, they're going to get the prices right on
Yep.
my equipment.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are the issues you're bending the ears of our
Yeah,
legislators
let
with
me,
this
I'm
year?
just going to sort of lean in and get my notes up because I can't remember all of these
Go ahead.
things. Because, of course, when you go, and that's the other thing, when you go up onto the Hill, you are exceptionally well briefed. You are given what we call leave behinds, which are, a one sheet piece of paper with the bill
Yeah.
and the ask and who's sponsoring, etc. And so that's absolutely key. And actually, EMS on the Hill, we've all been to conferences, right? We've all had the conference app, so you know when we can see Kelly and when we can see Rob speak. There's now a political version of that for Hill days. And so we had the Political Hill app where I knew where I had to be, what time, where I had to go, and all the leave behind
Good.
stuff. So that was pretty cool. And kudos to, and first time I've seen that actually, a conference app for politicking. So
Nice.
kudos to them. I'm going to lean in for a second so I can read. In fact, I'm going to move this over here so I can just pull up some of the bills and talk about. So support Medicare reimbursement for EMS treatment in place. Of course, we've talked about TIP and TAD,
Mhm.
treatment in place and transport to alternate destination. But of course, as we all know, that reimbursement for ambulance services only occurs when we transport somebody. That's a massively perverse incentive. We are taking
Yeah.
people to hospital that sometimes may not need to be there.
Yeah.
But for that hour that we donate without transporting somebody, at the moment, there's no reimbursement. Some states, let's just be clear, do.
Yeah.
Majority of states don't. And so there's a treatment in place bill. Again, it's a bipartisan bill. It has general support. And so that's one bill that we are promoting. Supporting MIH and community paramedicine programs. Again, one of the things, of course, waste, fraud, and abuse is a watchword on the Hill right now. That's
Hmm.
that's what those are the buzzwords that
Yeah.
are being used. And actually, this worked very well for us last week because community paramedicine programs have also got to do with waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, the point being is if we can either treat someone in place and not transport them, or if we can have a community paramedic going out to deal and, air quotes, dispose of the patient in the most appropriate way,
Yeah.
then that actually saves a huge amount of downrange cost,
Far less expensive and
far less
fragmented than
expensive. And
emergency
so
department care.
it
Yeah.
makes, and so again, one of my sort of key hooks was the fact of, you're talking about waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, look at this. This is one way that we can actually save Medicare dollars downrange because we can solve some of the issues, let's be clear,
Hmm.
in the home. And so,
Yeah.
that again, and you watch, of course, you become a
Yeah.
great people watcher when you're doing this because you then watch the head starts to nod and
Yeah.
okay, I've got you now. Let's carry on with this. So, community paramedicine bill. Siren Act, this is an ongoing set of grants pretty much for, and
Yeah.
again, where you are perfectly
Yep.
located for siren grants. Rural areas, rural EMS agencies need a bit of a financial booster. The Siren Act has been granting. And of course, the other thing about the Hill right now is, of course, we're seeing whopping cuts to FEMA. If we go over onto Fire Rescue One right about now, I'm sure they're talking about the closure of the National Fire Academy, the Emergency Management Institute, all that
Mm.
amazing stuff that goes on at Emmitsburg. That's sort of
Yeah.
in suspension at the moment. So,
Because of all the Doge
well,
stuff that's
because of the
going on.
Doge, but my point being is that grants and funding are currently being
Frozen.
being
Yeah.
being frozen,
Yeah.
and so we are asked, this money's pre-committed, right? So we want to make sure that we can just up it. And so Siren Act is again something. And by the way, Kelly, well, I'll
Yeah.
put all these in the show notes so
Yeah.
folk can follow through. Support EMS workforce development. Again, as we all know, recruiting retention is a challenge. What does this particular bill talk about? Well, it's talking about, easing the pathway to entry into EMS, and particularly also easing the pathway for entry from veterans into EMS. And this has been something that I interviewed the Military Medic of the Year for NAMT last year, Jonathan Liu, amazing guy, Green Beret, Delta type character,
18 Delta, yeah.
impeccable military medic. Can't get certified in Ohio. Now, luckily, he's a professor of healthcare because of his GI Bill. But he is just, and if I brought Jonathan on here now, he would give you a half an hour on what we need to do right to get this fixed. So
yeah, and
hopefully
that's
this bill will enable us to do that.
For guys with his level of training, is ludicrous that they can't get certified as a paramedic. Paramedicine, civilian paramedicine is less than what a special force medic does by a long shot.
Yep.
Less arduous, less complex.
Yeah, indeed. And as I say, a stellar guy. Yeah. And again, the story is quite simple that and you're right, we have these people with the right level of learning and military education and certification. It's a small leap just to bridge that. And so again, working on that one too. So and that's actually a subject dear to my heart. I have, as a veteran myself, that's something that's dear to my heart. The other one is, and we're going to get into boring reimbursement now, Kelly. I'm sorry I have to do it.
Oh, no.
I know.
It may be boring, but it's vital.
Stand by. Extend Medicare ground ambulance add-on payments. So Medicare is pretty, let's face it, a small amount of dollars for the work that we do. Yeah. And the more rural you get, of course, the less the call volume, therefore the less the potential for income. Therefore, the more challenging it is to actually stay open and do business, right? So that's the backdrop of this. And so in super rural areas, there is actually a 22.6% add-on to that already small Medicare number that you get, right, for reimbursement. Yeah. And so it's actually another part of the lifeblood for rural services, particularly super rural services, to have a little booster on top of that Medicare reimbursement you already get. So that kind of sets the scene.
What many people don't realize is that add-on is to break even, not to, that's just to break even.
Yeah, as you know, and we spent a lot of time talking about the cost of readiness. Okay, so the patient, quite rightly and deservedly, their 10 minutes of emergency, we have to take 24 hours to be ready for that 1 minute or that 10 minutes of emergency, right? So that's the cost of readiness. We have to be there. And of course, you're only reimbursed currently for the transport. So for the 24 hours you're there, theoretically, you're getting less than an hour's pay for the 24 hours, the other 23 hours. Yeah. So it's a challenge. And so this hasn't been made permanent. And so every year we have to go back. And I literally got into one office to see the same staffer that I've seen for the last 3 years and went, guess what I'm going to talk about next? I'm back again. You haven't made it permanent. Please extend it. You know the arguments, but I'm going to give you the arguments anyway. And actually, here's a member of my team here that has worked in a rural area. Let me explain the whys and the wherefores. And of course, we take EMTs and medics on the Hill to tell those stories. And I can wax all I want, but actually there's somebody here that's on the front line that's dealing with this.
The boots on the ground perspective.
Boots on the ground, exactly, and it's vitally important. And then finally, we invite everybody to join the EMS caucus. And what is a caucus? It's actually a focus group, right? It's a political focus group. And so there is and it doesn't happen in the Senate because there's only 100 of them, and they'd have to be like in 50,000 caucuses. It happens in the House. There is an EMS caucus, and we invite people to join the EMS caucus. It's led by a Republican and a Democrat, and obviously it just helps focus things on EMS. Now, of course, my joke but serious but not joking point I make there is I discovered that there is a caucus for everything on Capitol Hill. There's even a congressional sneaker caucus.
And I'm sure it has plenty of members while we're starving for participation.
And so, right, and if for those of you that are listening on the podcast and not watching the podcast, Kelly rolled his eyes quite appropriately. Please, permission granted to do that. Of course, my sort of hook there was, did you know, Senator, or did you know, Assemblyman, that there is more people on the EMS on the sneaker caucus than there is on the EMS caucus? So I'd like you to jog over and in your sneakers and join the EMS caucus. Now, of course, there's serious lobbying, and I don't want to decry the sport footwear industry, But I just think it's kind of ironic that, something that's a public service doesn't have it. Anyway, so if you're listening to us, here's my call to action. Get in touch with the local official in the House and ask them to go away and join the EMS caucus in their training shoes.
Yeah.
Sports
So,
shoes.
Rob, if one of our viewers were inspired enough to engage in advocacy, what avenues might they pursue to be more involved in being a steward of their profession? How can they get involved?
Yeah, well, first of all, if you are an NAEMT member, of which a lot of you out there are,
Mm-hmm.
there are regional board, regional directors for each sort of geographical region.
Yep.
You can get in each of those, have a sort of political action advocacy sort of function, if you like. Get in touch with them, and again, we'll find those notes, put those notes in the show notes. That can then get you in touch, advocating at your local level, as in state, and also for things like EMS on the Hill. And so there is a way through NAEMT. Your organizations, if you're actually a supervisor, a manager, you may well be a part of a state association anyway. And so I'm not just talking about whilst I was on the Capitol Hill this week in Washington, D.C., of course, I'm also concerned with my state capital, Sacramento, in my case.
What is it? Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local.
All politics indeed is local. And so there are people, either a state association, a national association. I used to be in Virginia. I used to be the vice president of the Virginia Association of Governmental EMS Administrators, which was all the organizations lobbying for EMS stuff in Virginia. So there's something out there, and if folk want to write in, if you're not unsure where to go, I'm sure we can quickly sort of redirect you in the right and appropriate direction. But before you sign off, Kelly, A, we're all politicians. B, we all have a voice. More importantly, we all have a story, and that story helps really paint the picture of why we need this level of assistance, these laws, these ordinances changed to help us do what we do, which is look after our fellow mankind.
Yeah, exactly. And I've said before that if the IRS knew how much EMTs like to gripe, they would tax it as a job benefit. And
I have seen paramedics all over the world, as you know, and I can tell you within about 30 seconds, we all have the same gripes, the same moans, the same complaints, the same issues.
But if you're going to gripe, if you want to earn the right to gripe, you need to have some skin in the game. Otherwise, it's just impotent. If you want a chance to be a steward of your profession and get something done about what you think needs done, you need to be involved and you need to advocate. So we appreciate you and your colleagues going to EMS on the Hill and speaking about the issues that are important to us. And we'd like to hear from our listeners and viewers. What issues are important to you that you think need addressing at the national level or at the state or a local level? We'd love to hear your thoughts at the show at ems1.com. And for myself and my better upgrade co-host, Rob Lawrence, thanks for tuning in to Inside EMS. We're going to catch you guys next week.